Okay, now we're ready to move into isolation, isolating parts of the image for later manipulation. So the tool that we're going to use is the pen tool, and we're going to create paths around and inside the image. Now, if you've worked with Bezier curves and the pen tool in the past, you may be a little worried at this stage because a lot of people are. It's a big learning curve to get working fast and efficiently with the pen tool, and I had to go through the same process too. I didn't like it for a long time. It was painful. I didn't feel like I had control over it. Everybody goes through that phase, getting comfortable with this tool. But what I have is a technique that not a lot of people know, but the ones who do love it, and it makes it so much easier working with the pen tool doing this way. I'm going to show you the standard way first, and then after that I'm going to show you a different technique that's very simple but very powerful called two-pass clipping. So let's get started with the regular clipping right now. I'll show you how it works, and then I'll show you a better and easier way to do it if you're not comfortable with the traditional way. So I'm going to hit P to go into my pen tool. I'm going to go full screen here by hitting F. That way I can just move my image around wherever I want. I'm going to go into the Paths palette and create a new path. Make sure you do this, because if you just start clipping, it's going to create a work path that later, if you go back into that work path and start clipping a new path on it, it's going to delete it. Make sure you have a new path created, and you can actually name it, in this case, Silo. This is just a shorthand for silhouette. It's just been around like that for ages, and it's understood by retouchers and designers alike as just the universal shorthand for the silhouette of the entire object. That's what we always start with. So I'm going to move in pretty close. This is a question that a lot of people have when they're first learning about clipping. They say, where do I put the path along the edge of the object? And the answer is, it depends. If you're clipping this out to be put onto a new background, which in this case we are, you can always go a little bit inside the shape, which is kind of nice because that way we won't introduce any edges of the gray showing through just because maybe we go a little bit outside the red edge that we see here. That's a nice way to just be safe. You don't want to go too far inside the line, but just with practice, you'll understand where to put the path along the edge of the object. So right now you'll see me do it and just follow my lead for an image that's in this kind of situation. Now, when you first enter into retouching in a professional environment, maybe as a junior or an intern, or maybe you're learning from another retoucher, this is going to be the first step that you really engage in. A lot of prep work needs to be done in retouching, and don't get me wrong, from intern, junior, all the way to senior, seasoned retoucher, we're all going to be doing clipping at some level, probably pretty extensively. It's sort of the foundational work for all of the later retouching that we're going to do. If we can get a good set of paths to isolate the different parts of our image right now, we don't have to worry about that at all later. The analogy that I always use is that it's like a painter taping off a house or a room in a house before painting. So what a painter wants to do is just compartmentalize the different tasks. Now, I'm not a painter, but I know that taping everything off beforehand sets you up for an easy job where you can focus on the painting later rather than worrying about edges and mistakes. This is exactly the same for retouching, because if we can get this set up right now, we don't have to worry about those painful details later of being really careful when we're engaged in the creative process. And it also sets us up for a situation where we don't introduce mistakes into the system. So you can also see I've been doing this for years, and I still have to be pretty careful with the way that I clip, the way that I draw a path. And lots of times I have to go back and mess around with the handles and fine tune it. Another great sort of assistant method to use in clipping is the rotate tool. All it does is rotate your canvas. And it's actually not rotating your physical image, it's just rotating your view of it. So what this does is it helps you get in a more comfortable position with your hand and drawing the line, because in a lot of situations in commercial retouching, we might have to clip 15, 20 images a day, depending on the studio that you're working in. And so speed is important. And clipping is a very physical act. It's very sort of taxing physically, because you're really having to pay close attention to the screen and using your hand and arm place things in a very careful position and create a very controlled line. And that honestly takes a toll on your body. Try clipping 30 images in a day and see how you feel. So what we do is rotate the image around to better align to our hand and the way that it naturally draws straight lines, because that's what we're essentially doing here, is drawing a series of straight lines by dragging the direction of the curve out. So you can continually adjust the view so that the curve more easily aligns to the object. So notice here I'm actually really clipping inside the shape, and that's going to be fine because no one's really going to see that a millimeter was shaved off the edge of that lace. Now you can see how closely zoomed in I work too. This is comfortable for me. I wouldn't want to be much closer, especially once here you get into the pixel grid. Can't see anything. But this is too close, and it's just finding that sweet spot. This works pretty well for me, and I just sort of do it intuitively now. So you'll see along the edge here, there's like a bit of a material defect here on the top. This is a situation where you can think of the clipping stage as also part of the cleanup stage to some extent. Is on the silhouette, you just want to trim off any defects like that. You don't always have to align the edge to what you're actually seeing in the object. And especially in like garments and things like that, you want to trim off any things that are distracting along the edge of the shape that you're clipping in order to create a more streamlined object. You don't always have to do that in Liquify, which is also a great thing to remember, because you can just trim off edges of things when you're clipping out the silo. And I'm right-handed, so you can see that when I rotate, I'm usually dragging out my line most comfortably from a left to right position. So you can see here, once again, I'm not obsessing over clipping directly on the edge of the pixels here, because it doesn't really matter, because I'm going to extract this shoe from the background. I know that. So because that can often seem daunting if you're looking at an image and thinking about clipping, and you might say, there's no way I can clip that out because I'd have to zoom all the way in to get it perfect. You don't need to do that. Most cases you can clip just slightly inside the object, but you also see when we don't want to do that. But for now, especially on the silo, you don't have to agonize over that precision. And you might also notice that I'm moving a lot faster now, because when you first start out, your clipping task for the day takes a while to warm up. Once you do, start moving a lot faster. And we're done. Oh, make sure you close that path. Now you should have something that looks like this in your path palette. I'm going to zoom out, hit R, escape to return to normal view. Now, I'm going to select this path just to show you something that might happen. Up in here, this drop down has all these different modes for what that path can be. Now, if you just clip something out and you see in your path here it looks like this, this is wrong. It's reversed. I always want to be in exclude overlapping shapes mode. So if it is like that, you can follow the steps that I just did by deselecting the path, selecting it again, holding down Option to change the selection tool, select the whole thing, and change the mode here. Also, I have rubber band on. This is something that maybe might not seem so obvious to a lot of people, but if you have this on, you can see the trailing edge off the cursor. With it off, you don't see that. I really like to have it on because I feel like it helps me determine where that line is going to fall. So in a lot of retouching, this might be where you would normally stop, but what we're doing now is getting into the real pro level stuff, and I don't see this as just a single shoe or a single shape that I'm now going to do a bunch of global lighting changes on and call that my retouching. No, at this level what we do is we think of this in terms of all these different parts. This is a sole, a midsole, a toe box, a swoosh, a liner. I need to isolate all those elements. I'm going to tape off every room in the house to use that analogy. So let's start with the red sole, and I'm going to show you 2-pass clipping this time so you can see how it compares to the traditional method. I'm going to bring up a new path. Move right to left this time. And notice I'm just laying down points along this line for my first pass. Make sure you're laying down a hard corner point every time, and you know that it's a corner point when it doesn't have any handles coming off like that. Sometimes, especially with a tablet, you might click and drag out handles that are actually really hard to see. You'll pick it up later, but you just want to lay down corner points for now. So I've reached the end. I'm not going to redo that silo clip on the outside. I'm just going to finish and close the path like this. This will make sense later, but in short, I don't need to worry about this outside line because this is going to be contained within my silo mask. So now the second pass. What we're going to do is add a point in between each point we've laid down. Now, Photoshop and the Bezier engine is really smart at doing this calculation, and you'll see what I mean when I drag this point down. It almost magically aligns to the shape and curve that we've outlined in our first pass. It works really well for long undulating lines like this, as you'll see. So this is the beauty of 2-pass, is I don't need to mess around with any of the handles. I don't have to draw along the line as I go. I'm just dragging points out to create the curves between the hard anchor points. Yeah, a lot of people, when they learn this technique, even really experienced retouchers who are pretty damn good at clipping and have done thousands and thousands of paths in their life, will switch off to this, especially if they're doing a lot of clipping, just to switch modes and mix it up a little bit, because it's still very fast. You might think it takes longer, but the truth is that comparatively, it takes just about the same amount of time as the traditional path. And there we go. Done. Now, in general, you might be looking at all this clipping that I'm going to do and say, well, that's actually so much work. How can you expect to do this on every image? Well, what I'm doing is I'm front loading work that I would have to do later if I sort of neglect this stage. In order to do a full retouch, your client is going to expect you at a high, when you're working on high level imagery like this, to have control over every single aspect of the image. And if they make a comment at some point when you're getting feedback from them, and you haven't isolated your image in this way, first of all, you might be painted into a corner where you can't make a targeted change, or you may have to go back into thinking in isolation terms and how I'm going to break this out. Am I going to have to paint a mask, et cetera, et cetera? You want to be able to respond to client feedback as quickly as possible. And this is the system to set you up for that level of success later. If you have all this in place, you're able to really think on your feet and respond quickly to anything that comes your way. All right, now I'm ready to move on to the next path, and I'm just going to keep moving up the shoe. I'm going to start moving a little bit faster now and just power through all the rest of the clipping. Yeah, so next I'm going to clip out the bubble sole area. And notice I'm not going to clip this line along the red edge because I've already done that. It's honestly like one of those like little Russian dolls. Once you start putting this all together, like everything's nested within. See that gummy edge there? We're just gonna like destroy that later. Just completely wipe it. Okay, cool. See how quickly we keep moving on to the next layer. I'm going to do the blue now. I'm going to stick with 2-pass because it's just feeling good right now. And this is the point where I begin to intersect the bubble sole that I just just clipped out. So I'm going to clip around this little blue tab here, but once I connect the line to that bubble sole, I'm going to go into it and once again just do a loose path around the bottom because I've already created that line. Now you can hold down Option, and on these hard corner anchors, you can drag them out, turn them into a curve. Great. Oh yeah, so I'm actually not naming these, but that's a good thing to do. Let's just say red sole. Next one, bubble sole. Blue mid. And as you can see, we're building this wonderful library of shapes that we can use all throughout the retouching process to isolate these areas. And the beautiful thing about Bezier curves is they're vector information, so they're not pixels. I can scale them as much as I want. I can tweak them. I can always go back and edit them. This is like a wonderful library of assets that gives you incredible power to target different areas of the image throughout the whole process. Now, a lot of people isolate in different ways. They might actually start painting masks or pulling masks from channels. In my experience, there's nothing as flexible, useful, and durable as a great set of very carefully created paths in commercial retouching. And the other methods that you might try to use, because clipping out might seem like a lot of work, believe me, when you try those methods, you go down that road, you think I might just be able to paint a mask for this area, you're going to spend as much time, if not more, tweaking that mask, trying to get it right, and fixing the errors later. Stick with the process, make yourself a good library of paths right off the bat. All right, swoosh time. Now, there are no joining edges where the swoosh meets anything, so we're just going to clip it all the way out. And see how few points I put down in this 2-pass on the swoosh. You can do that. I'll show you. Since this swoosh is a very, let's say, continuous and uniform geometric shape, just dragging that point out almost exactly matched to the contour of it. I find that pretty amazing and pretty powerful for this method of 2-pass clipping. You can also use the arrow keys to nudge around points, which sometimes really helps with accuracy. Oh, and in general, a guiding principle of good clipping is the fewer the points you lay down, the more elegant the shape, and the smoother the shape. Okay, I think that's good for this. Oh, this line down here. Let's move that down. Okay, great. Swoosh is in the bag. What's next? Let's move on to laces. Now, I'm really doing the full service here on this. And I may find that I don't even really do anything too targeted to the laces here, but in my experience, the rule of a good clipping library is you'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And you see, like, I switch back and forth between 2-pass and traditional a lot. And I do so much clipping that I don't even really notice that I'm doing it now. It just sort of happens automatically. And you'll start to do that too once you get more comfortable. Notice how I'm going outside my silo here because I don't want to redo that edge. I don't want to redo any edge. All right. Laces went pretty fast. Let's do the liner here. I'm going to label that path laces, not Lakers. Laces. Liner. So here's an interesting point. I don't want to redo this edge right here that I just created for the lace. I'm going to go right through it. You'll see why I'm not worried about that once we start setting up our masks. Okay, we've got the liner. You might tidy that up a bit too. So last but not least, I'm going to pull out this Air Max logo because I know I'm going to need that at some point. Now, as you can see, doing the logo is a little bit touchier because we need to be a little bit more precise here. I'm going to switch to two pass, excuse me. You can switch back and forth while you're working depending on what you need to do. Now, the more you watch this method of two pass, the more you're going to get comfortable with identifying how I choose to lay down a point and where I choose to put it. I generally use this rhythm of sort of placing it on the edge of a rounded corner and directly inside like a nook like that. I don't know what to call it, but this placement is key, and I stick with that throughout the whole process of two pass, and it tends to get the fastest results for me when I lay down the intermediate points. And sort of in the middle of a dip on a curve, the middle of the curve itself is a good place to drop the point. This is one of those things that's sort of hard to codify, is that like a rule book for where to place the points, because it's kind of personal, but it's also kind of, I mean, it just really emerges from doing the process of learning where to put points. And you know, once you get your own method down, it kind of stays pretty consistent, as I've seen with myself, and then watching other retouchers who've picked this up do it. They definitely develop their own system. So this might appear pretty tedious and time consuming right now because it totally is. But later, when you can just simply click on this and make a perfect isolation, make a perfect selection, and then make the perfect mask, you're gonna thank your past self for doing that, for spending all the time to clip it out and make it perfect. All right, looks pretty good. But, remember, if we want to change anything later, we have this wonderful clipping path here that we can go back and tweak. So now I have pretty much every element isolated in a path except for the body of the shoe here. But that's the thing. Since I've clipped everything else out, I essentially have isolated every edge of this body material from this blue midsole where it meets it, the swoosh, the front end of the red where it touches there, the liner, and the laces. So later, when we get into tiered masking, I'm going to show you exactly how this all relates and how we're able to use these elements to also isolate the body of the shoe. So once again, all this work that we just did, which seemed maybe painful and tedious at the time, is a commitment to the process. Knowing that you need to do this and just doing it every time is one of those things that you can feel happy that you put a bunch of time in to make life easier down the road. And this is all we need to do for clipping, so now we're ready to move on to the next stage.